Professor Pete here, animation class. We are going to look at Animate again and look at some of the different tools we can use to animate because it's great, works really well. This is what we're going to do. This is the final piece. So we have a car kind of flying on a motion path. We have rotation. We have the warp pin tool as well. And we're going to look at easing in and out. So first off, let's look at the car. The car is going to, the best way to simulate easing in and out is by using a car example, because everyone's been in a car. We all realize that when we are at a red light, it turns green. We need to accelerate that car. It goes from 0 to 60, gradual. It doesn't just hit 60 kilometers an hour. It gets there over time. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to just go ahead and create a keyframe on frame 50 here. Over here, I will then insert a classic tween so it gets there. Might as well just do this one here too. And then we'll just drag it across the screen. Not too worried about everything else. The background disappears. But as we look at this, you'll see that it goes in a linear fashion. So there it is. Very linear, like a robot. Doesn't look so attractive. So if we just select and click on the timeline, we can go to the properties. The property shows up like this, where there's easing, classic ease. So we can pick easing in. As you can see here, it'll accelerate over time and then it will keep going at that speed. We can ease out where it's really fast and slows down, or we can do both, ease in and out, where it accelerates and then decelerates to a stop. This looks pretty good to us. And you have different versions of it. You have the quad, you have the more exaggerated, all these different types that you can choose from. I think I like cubic, and there's even elastic, which I think goes some crazy thifts. And there's even bounce, so good for a ball, for example. Anyways, I'm going to pick cubic. If we want to edit it, you can edit it with the pencil. So now we play this, you can see that it accelerates and then it decelerates. Very realistic. In this case, our car is going to fly, so I'm going to go back over here, go over to the timeline, and then change it to an ease in so it takes off beautifully. Okay, so double click and we're good. I'm going to go bring in the background because it's kind of weird. And I have 5 on the keyboard, and that brings in our background. So that's using easing in and out. It's one of the 12 principles of animation. Let's move on to the next, which is something very simple. It's called rotation. Now, I'm going to look at this, for example. The windmill is actually a movie clip. If I double click on this, you'll see that I've got the stand and I have the blades. So I'm going to go over to the blades and I'm going to hit, this will be 2 seconds long, so maybe I'll go to hit F5 here. And I'm going to just right click and create classic tween, and then on frame, the last frame, we'll hit F6. And I'll go over here towards the first keyframe, and over in the tweening, you see that there's rotate. So select clockwise, pretty straightforward. You can put 3 or counterclockwise, and I'll hit F5 on this here too. And now we can test this out. And now you'll see that the blades are rotating. Looks pretty good. The next thing we're going to look at is motion paths. Now, this is kind of interesting. It's a bit of work to set up, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer and just call it path, which I'll need to delete later. And I'll go ahead and just draw something in. So I'm going to click on the pen tool, which doesn't show on here. And then I'll click and drag until I get kind of an interesting shape. Clicking and dragging, and then we'll take off like that. So I'm going to just select on this, hit A on the keyboard, brings you there, and we can edit this a little bit. So anyways, there is my path. I double click on it. I can hit Control C, and I will go to the car. Now the car, I need to get rid of this. It's got to run under I'm going to remove the classic tween. It has to run under the other type of tween, and it's called a motion tween. You'll know that because it turns yellow. So I'm on the frame 1 of my car. I delete all the rest of the frames. I'm going to right click and make sure it's set to motion tween. Now when I do that, you'll see that it turns like this green color because it's selected. If I deselect it, you'll see that it's yellow. I'll hit F6 over here and then I'll drag it across. As you see how I dragged it across, it creates this line, a series of lines. Now I'm going to replace it by hitting Control Shift V, and when I do that, you'll see that now the path that I had created earlier is here. So again, you need to copy the path and then you can paste it in. Notice too, if I just scrub across here, that it does follow it, but then it doesn't follow it. It kind of takes off in this kind of weird shape. So I'm just going to go over the timeline here and just orient to path. So now that that's turned on, it will do some craziness. So I'm going to then try to rotate this back. I don't know if it'll work. I would say in general, Animate sometimes is not very predictable. In this case, this is one of those situations where this thing should follow the path more directly. So one thing you can do is to redraw it, and when you redraw it, that should fix it. I'm just going to keep it as it is because I kind of like it. The last thing we want to do is to create a fire. So I'm on this other layer. I'm going to go ahead and just delete the path and bring in another layer. I'll call it fire. And I'm going to just paste in, make sure the timeline's on 0. I have a fire and a flame. I'm going to put this in the background a bit. Maybe I'll put it even behind the mountains. And I will animate this. Now I'm going to use one of the tools that we haven't talked about yet. And if you click on the 3 dots, you'll see that there are some tools that we can use here. And you can see there's the pen tool. We can drag that in and put that down here. But the other one we're going to use is the warp tool. And it's right here. So I'm going to just drag that in. And there it is. So the asset warp tool is really useful in the sense that we can animate particles. And so I'm going to just put a few of these, especially where the tips are. The more you have, the more you need to animate. But I think that will be good. All right, so I'm going to then go on to frame 5 and hit F6, creates a new keyframe. And I can start to move them ever so slightly. And this will create a really random effect on my fire. And I think just for purposes, I'll make it into a classic tween, so that way, and this one as well. That way when I go into my next frame, which is maybe 4 or 5 frames later, F6, we can then not do so much clicking because now everything will move. It's good to look at fire examples to see how, hit F6, the fire has been manipulating. You can see how particles will work really good with this, right? You could have smoke, you could have fire in this case. And just for the purpose of things, I want to just copy and paste them as well. So you can go here, right click, copy frames, and then paste frames. So it's a little bit different from Control-C and Control-V. The timeline in terms of the way you can copy and paste is very different from what you see on the stage. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. Control-Enter, just have a look. And so there's the flames. So there, the flames looks okay. I think the last couple of keyframes I could have made a little bit longer. So after doing all of those edits, now we can see that our flame looks pretty good, almost like the character's dancing. We can also put this onto the back of the DeLorean. So what we could do is we can copy or cut those frames. In this case, we'll just copy them. And we'll have to create a movie clip out of this car. So I'll hit F8, make it into a movie clip. Okay, car, flames, we'll say. The reason why we need to do that is we need the extra layers. So double click on it, and then we'll make a new, and then we'll paste, and there is the flames. Now, one of the issues with this flames is that it kind of is going to be in the same place. So every single keyframe, we need to move it. We'll put it behind the car, and we'll hit F5 on the keyboard, so that way the car doesn't disappear. But you can see that we'll have to need to move every keyframe here. So what we'll do here instead is we'll click on the onion skin, which shows all of the layers up to a certain range, and we can go to edit multiple frames. Now we can drag across the timeline, and we should be able to select all those keyframes and move them together. And so that's how it's done. By clicking all of that, now it's all there. I'm going to go ahead and just shift click all this again, hit Q on the keyboard, and that allows me to rotate it. So now everything as we see it will now burst out from the car. And if we want to, we can edit this a little bit. We can reduce the number of frames on this. Let me turn this off now. And that way the flames will kind of kick off when we want it to. I'm going to go ahead and remove these frames. And that way I have a little bit more space here. I can click and drag this towards the end. So it won't ignite the car towards the end. So here it kind of goes, and then that looks pretty good. So now when we test the scene, you can see that the flames kind of kick in after about frame 6 or 7. You could have this happen a little bit later too. But there you go. There's a number of different things from easing in and out, which you just have to use. It's very straightforward and easy. You have the warp tool, which is great for particles such as fire and smoke. You have the rotations, maybe you might want to use that. And then you have the motion paths. So just some different things that you can try out. Maybe you're going to be able to use it, but either way, I think it'll help speed up the process of what you're trying to do. Professor Pete out, keep learning.